Yeah, sorry, guys. Do I want to know what's been said or do I not want to know?
Landscape architects.
So the disease is free of pathogens. What pathogen in particular? I remember a similar thing to this. 2010, 2011, was a place called Hyde Park where our illustrious council advised the world at an international conference that every fig tree in Hyde Park needed to be removed. Pathogen unknown. Now, fortunately, that didn't happen, and all but one of those fig trees are still there as far as I know. So, yeah, look, I sometimes wonder about landscape architects. The great thing about landscape architects is they know almost nothing about trees, almost nothing about soils, and that's not a criticism of them. Their job is to design and design with landscape elements, so pavers, spaces, sculptures, water, all those sort of things. The fact that they use the word landscape is probably misleading. What they should be called is exterior designers or exterior architects. And if you think of them in those terms, it's a lot easier to understand what's going on. We've been deluded by the term landscape to think that that actually means they know about landscape. It's not. It's a misnomer. Now, are there landscape architects out there that are brilliant at these areas? The answer is yes. There are landscape architects that are brilliant at soils, brilliant at plants. It's like, saying arborists are brilliant at reading plans. Well, hell, they're not. Arborists are experts at reading or locating trees on plans using GIS. I can assure you for the last hour and a half, we're not. At least I'm not. I thought that I bought this lovely little thing called a Bad Elf Mini, which I'll eventually master, but at the moment, it's a very expensive suppository. So we've got this issue when it comes to interfacing with other professions, and we've done a poor job of asserting our expertise. So, for example, knowing what works in an area, what's suitable, is something that an arborist should be able to do. Whereas a landscape architect may not be able to do that. He goes to the local nursery and he says, "What have you got for sale?" And they say, "Oh, well, look, I've got a beautiful little slow-growing tree, Tristaniopsis lorena luscious, and it's a great tree, except there happens to be a species of native beetle that has adapted quite well to being able to destroy it. It's a member of the Buttress group, jewel beetle, and so it's slowly catching up and will eventually probably wipe out 20 or 30% of Tristaniopsis lorena luscious because it's not suitable to all environments. And so this is where we bring our expertise to bear. We also understand about the anatomy and the physiology. So all of those things have a long-term bearing. So yeah, love landscape architects as I do. We've done a poor job of saying, hey, you probably should be talking to us about this. Now, this is not just a problem in Australia, this is a problem worldwide. In America, a landscape architect can become a tree risk expert.
Yeah.
Got me beat. I don't understand how. Having said that, an AQF level 3 climber can become a tree risk expert in Australia and overseas. Again, without understanding how the organism works, I get perplexed about that. I had one of my young trainee out at the moment today, and Chris is probably listening in there, and we're talking about the fact that we don't understand almost anything about anatomy and physiology by the time we finish a diploma. Yep. Peter, you got your mic off. You're laughing in the background. I think there should be 3 months of compulsory anatomy and 3 months of a compulsory physiology as a part of a diploma, and it's meant to be there in the background knowledge. We're meant to understand what the organism does and how. We often don't, and I've had a lot of arborists in the last month or so talking to me about how do you deal with protection of trees and development site and having a major encroachment. And the answer to my mind, I think, is it's quite simple. If I move a tree, I'm moving it with less than 80%, minus 80%. So 20% of the nominal root zone recommended by the standard. How can that be possible? How do we do it? And I have the same dumb answer every time I have a permit to use a chemical that killed last year over 250 Australians. It stimulates root development better than any other chemical we know. And that chemical is called water. Now, if adding water is all that it requires, and oftentimes that's all that it requires to make it successful, then why do we have people say, oh, look, and I read it in a report last week, if the tree has a 25% encroachment of the NRZ, the tree should be removed. And I thought, oh no, it's not what we need to be communicating. Dominic, you got a comment?
Yeah, so did you say if it has less than 25% encroachment or more than?
No, more than.
Okay,
Now,
yeah.
my view is that if it has more than 95%, you definitely will need to remove it. But the Buckland yew was moved with less than 10%. It was moved in the late 1800s. I've got a photograph of it that I paid a fortune for from 1907, and the tree was looking good then. It did lose a big branch in 2007. It was only 1,200 years old when it was moved. It was moved with a 2.4 meter diameter tree moved with a 5 meter by 5 meter root plate. I'm guessing it will die, but not in my lifetime. If we put that into the Australian standard context, we'd be told, no, this can't be done. The development needs to be redesigned. Not, well, yeah, look, it's taxus, it's fairly tolerant. With a little bit of care and aftercare, you could make that work. In fact, that's what the guy said at the time. His name was William Barron. He wrote a beautiful textbook on arboriculture called The British Winter Garden. I recommend everyone have at least a modern copy of it. Chapter 4, The Evils of Pot-Bound Culture, talks about, the fact that we grow things in pots and that screws things up. So he's looked into this. He's looked into, how quickly do trees grow when you cut their roots, and apparently they recover. This shouldn't be surprising to us because Hamilton does the same thing in 1984. So, here we are, 2026, and we're struggling with things that were been talked about and successfully done. Gilfoyle, Melbourne Botanic Gardens still has araucarias that were moved by Gilfoyle in the 1800s. How come they're still alive? Based on what we get told, they should be dead. They might have taken a decade or so, and again, that's a myth, because if the tree survives the first year and starts recovering, unless something sets it back, it should continue to recover if we continue to provide it ongoing care as we have been. And in most cases, that's just making sure there's a little bit of extra water for the first few years, maybe first 10 or 15 years if you've got a big tree and a small root plate. So we can do that on a transplant. Where does the myth come from? I don't know. Now, yeah, sure, you don't want to put it back into an enclosure that is just that size and that size only, although that was done in Hong Kong at Kowloon Station. They built a whole train station under the tree, dug around it, left it in situ, made a garden, and that's probably 20 times trunk diameter. So it's still got a lot of soil volume that's been left there, but again, it's all doable. Not all the time, not every time, and that's where we need to bring our own expertise. So arborists have done a very poor job of relaying what things we need to know, relaying what we know, and then getting that information. And I'll encourage you. In fact, Peter and I were discussing this, and I think I mentioned it. There's a wonderful thing now, Gemini. It's a Google product. You could ask Gemini to go through the last 100 journals, and pick every article on a topic that you want, and give you a summary of that, each of the journal articles, and then give you quiz questions on it, and then test you on those quizzes. It's all free whilst you're driving along. I looked at it. Amazon sent me a parcel the other day, and they said, you've got 3 months of free music. And I thought, why would I want to listen to music? my driving time is just prime learning time. You can have debates with Gemini. I love it. I love winning. I love losing. I love learning in that process. You think you know a subject well, start testing yourself on it. And you'll quickly realize where things start coming undone when you start hearing words you don't know, or concepts you've not heard. So yeah, definitely there's a lot of fun there. And we will, at some stage or other, I'll do a demonstration of how to do a training system using Gemini, where you just go through and quiz and learn. And we don't want to just try and remember things. That's a bad way of learning. We want to try and internalize, comprehend, and go to the underlying principles behind it so we can always derive our way back there. So again, if you learn anatomy and you learn physiology well, you should be able to start saying, well, what do I expect to happen and how do I expect that to happen? You should be able to postulate things that have not been shown. So one of my first PowerPoints ever, I postulated that there must be something that makes water controlled and regulated in its uptake. It was just inevitable. If it didn't, we'd get saturated soils and we'd end up with movement by osmosis from high concentration to high concentration. Our roots would explode. They don't. So if our roots don't explode, then water uptake has to be regulated, and it is. It's regulated through a membrane protein called aquaporins. We now know about that, but in the 1990s, we didn't know about it. So in fact, we really didn't get to know about aquaporins until a gentleman won a Nobel Prize for it, and then it became something we started to know more about. So these things are not easy, and I think I relayed this last meeting, but I want to relay it again. And this is, how come we as an industry are so primitive and so behind? And I don't think we need to say that we are. I think we're typical of an industry. When the cohesion theory was first presented, and I'm going to go from memory, I think it was 1896. That is how water gets taken up through a tree, negative pressure and cohesion. When that was first proposed, it didn't hit textbooks until the 20s and 30s, 1920s, 1930s. It wasn't in high school textbooks in the 1970s when I was there in Australia. It hadn't quite transitioned through there yet. And I'm pretty certain when it hit the university, those guys were teaching it. It's just that they've got to teach somebody who then is teaching the teacher, who then delivers it. So you take decades for these things to change. And Max Planck was once asked what it was like to come up with a theory that would change science. And his comment was, you don't. You have to wait for people to die. And in arboriculture, that's definitely true. I hear every single week, oh, that tree's got a codominant stem, it needs to be removed. That tree's got an included junction. There was a beautiful, in Leichhardt, there was a beautiful codominant Araucaria cunninghamiana, over 100 years of age, that was removed because it had a codominant stem, and the arborist that looked at it was taught or believed, or somebody had told him that anything with a codominant stem is dangerous and therefore needs to be removed. Now, the first person that finds an Araucaria with a codominant stem that splits, I'm begging you to provide it so I can look at it. I haven't been able to do it. The only one I've been able to do is one pulled with a bobcat to failure, not been able to be done by wind. And that's even after the Kernel tornado. We didn't find the S. Dominic.
Just on that, I'm like, as a young, as the youngest arborist in the room, when I was at TAFE, we weren't necessarily taught just because there's a codominant tree need to go, but I'm not surprised that there are arborists out there with that attitude. But what I wanted to say was, I looked at my guess, this is just off the top of my head guess, but I'd say I looked at a Eucalyptus meliodora this morning, probably around 250 years old. I'd say a 30-meter canopy spread, codominant at the base with a hole in it on one side and elephant ear on the other. And I thought, well, that's an issue, but that's been an issue for 200 years. So how about we just monitor it and go from there?
Yeah, look, and the current research shows us that in a reasonable data set, but again, you can't put everything in that one category, but in cyclonic winds, trees with co-dominant stems were no more likely to fail than trees that didn't have co-dominant stems, except if there was already splitting occurring. And that gives me a fair degree of comfort. And I'm horribly old-fashioned. I look at the splits now in co-dominant stems and I see the active splitting, and if it's in a low enough area, I just keep on walking. I just can't think about why I'd bother worrying about it. Now, you know, different if it's over a main road, but you know, we just develop this mentality that, you know, everything in trees is dangerous, and yet everything in trees is killing 5 people a year in Australia, 5 coming up to 6 as our population grows. 1 person every 5 million or thereabout. That's a good rough figure. You know, what would I do to deal with something like this? Now, you can have this discussion with Gemini, because Gemini have had these discussions many times. How big is a 1 in 5 million risk? And the answer is it's statistically insignificant from a risk perspective, considering that cancer is a 1 in 5 in a lifetime, or a 1 in 400 in a year. That's damn scary in comparison. Heart disease, way up there, you know. And then so I tried to find things, and which is part of the reason why Gemini have had these ongoing discussions, something that would help you relate to the similar. A 6 to 65-year-old without a physical disability that leads to problems in chewing has about the same chance of dying eating food as we have of dying from a tree on an annual basis. On that basis, I'm going to suggest something. People that are worried about trees should be putting their food through a NutriBullet, adding an extra bit of fluid so that it's not going to cause choking from being a thick paste like peanut butter. Peanut butter can kill you. Just the stickiness of it. So, and you should be drinking your food from here on in. I'm not going to talk about what it's going to do to your teeth and how that's going to affect your life expectancy, because it will. And just, again, something that's that small, we just don't worry about. Who here will sit down and have a meal tonight and say, well, this could be my last one? I'm awfully worried. I don't do that when I get into a car, and that's 1 in 20,000. 1 in 20,000. I'm not a good driver. I'm flippant about it because the risk is so small. If I could have 125 friends, one of those friends in an 80-year average life will die. Okay? I probably have 12 friends. Hey, this is something, you know, that's hard for me to relate to. Now, there's not a tragic loss when someone dies on a road, but, you know, 1 in 20,000 is still a risk that most of us are flippant about because it's small. And then we worry and panic about the most incredible, obscure things. Yes, Dominic.
Just something I've been meaning to ask for ages, just keep forgetting, just with the general use of the term codominant. When I say codominant, I then think I then need to specify what sort of codominant. But just generally speaking, when we say codominant, do people generally assume it is an acute angle with included bark? Look, when people say codominant, what are they meaning?
Yeah, look, all sorts of different things. I use a horrible word that is jargon, and that's the word, there's an inclusion. And what I'm saying is it's a tight angle with included bark. And tight angle with included bark is no more likely to fail than a normal branch during cyclonic winds, unless there's already splitting. Now, oftentimes there is splitting and the tree is responding to it. Maddock talks about this, and then Duncan Slater refines it beautifully. Maddock says, well, if it's nice and rounded where on the outside of those two unions, like a bulldog's nose, don't worry about it. It's dealing with it. If it's sharp and pointed and there's a set of inverted edges on it, like this, where it comes back in, that means it's actively splitting on the inside, and those pursed lips, that type thing, is an indication that something is potentially going wrong on the inside. But you can have trees like that, and we've all seen them, where the tree split down a meter, did it during a storm, and 20 years later, the tree is still sitting there saying, hey, okay. And 30 years later, it's still there. In fact, I can go along and I can cut one half of that tree off, and I can go see what it looks like in 40 and 50 years' time, because I've seen those where one stem's failed and the other stem's left, and that other stem's not falling over. The tree's making itself stronger. In fact, the time that it was greatest likelihood of failure was immediately after the split occurred. Over time, trees make themselves stronger. They do it at both the cellular level, so how the cells are orientated. So if you look at an old tree, you'll often see the grain sweeps backwards and forwards and moves from side to side. And I've shown you photographs on ArborMentor previously, so go back and find one. If you have troubles, I'll show you one. That's at a cellular level, and that makes itself stronger because it's making itself a cellular-based plywood. That's strong. But it also does it at a subcellular level. It does it by changing the microfibril angles in S1, S2, S3, the secondary walls that make wood. So it gets two goes at it, and it's really brilliant at doing it, which is why so often you don't see trees fail, and trees that you look at and you think, oh, okay, that's not what I was expecting. And the puzzling thing is, then I get perfectly normal looking things fail, and I've got no idea that they're going to fail. And that falls into what we call background risk. If I can't discern it, then I can't change it. And people talk to me, oh, look, there's this tree, I just had one today, beautiful blue gum in a school, 1.5 meter diameter trunk, young tree, probably 60 years, 70 years old, something like that, in ideal conditions. And it occasionally drops a branch, maybe 15 centimeters or so in diameter. You tell me which branch is going to drop next, I'll prune it. I'll lighten the load off that one branch and it won't fail. You can't, then I've got to put it in the same branch category as every branch on that tree and every branch on a similar tree like that. And that's a blue gum. It hangs over the Pacific Highway in Sydney, going down through Turramurra, Wahroonga. I see them sitting there. On roads that, have occupation rates of 1 in 10 or higher, if they're not removing them all from beside the road, it's because occasionally something's going to drop. Generally in inclement conditions, when we say, well, and then I hear someone say, well, yes, but it failed on a weekend. What would have happened if it failed when a student was there? And I'm horrible. The answer is they'd be dead. But 16% of the time your school's used, outside is used for 10% of that. So let's say 2% of the time. The students roam randomly around the area in that time. So that's 0.002. What are you worried about? Same school last year, they had a table setting underneath a tree like that. And I said, look, just move the table setting. You don't have to get rid of the tree. You don't have to worry about it. But if you're sitting down and there's a crack, you'll take longer to get up and move. So, have it where people that walk underneath it, again, pretty low odds of something going wrong. But asking them to sit there for half an hour a day, admittedly only 200 days a year, that's a nothingness. So, look, the world's changing its views. Again, I appreciate there are arborists out there that are terrified about trees. And that's in the same category. That's what they were told, or that's what they believe. The funniest thing is some of those come from climbing backgrounds. And Bridget Wright died February 2014. And for the next 3 or 4 months, students would come in and say, what have you been doing this week? And they'd say, oh, we've been cutting down trees in schools, they're dangerous trees. And did you get an elevated work platform in? No. Did you load the tree, drop a branch on it, make it, so you really weren't worried about it failing? No. So why did you consider that it was an extreme risk or a high risk tree? What was it about it? Oh, it had dead branches. Could you prune the dead branches out? It had a hollow. Now, you know now that hollows seldom fail, but there are arborists out there who say it's got a hollow, it needs to be removed. And then how do we communicate risk? Young arborists that worked with me at one stage, Sean looked at some trees in the school. They had hollows. There are ironbarks. He said the trees had hollows, the ironbarks. The risk was low. And the school's work health and safety committee saw the word low risk. And they said, it poses a low risk. It's not safe, and therefore it needs to be removed. And that's because, hard to believe, work health and safety committees haven't, again, understood risk. So it's one of the reasons why we don't use the word low, medium, or high in our reports. It's either work that is essential to be done or it's not essential to be done. If it's essential, like the big broken branch in the tree last week, you've got to get it done. If it's not essential, when you get around to it, it's part of maintenance. Be responsible, do it within a few years. But it's still maintenance. It's not being done because there's a risk. It's being done because in time that risk might come into the stage where it becomes essential. Let's deal with it, the old stitch in time. So as much as I love the simplicity of track, it has problems. And the first problem that it has is it produces a risk that's low and then says, you need to tell them how to make the risk lower. Well, if it's low and I need to do something, then the risk cannot be as low as we need it to be. We need to make it lower. And then we do the worst bit in the training, and it dawned upon me this morning. I don't know why. When you do your track training, you'll be asked to wear a helmet, a hard hat. I wonder why. Is it because trees are that dangerous? I mean, I wonder if I went out and bid on a tree job, did a quote and put a helmet on. So, no, I'm not getting under that tree until I've got a helmet on. It's done to incite fear. It's frankly one of the most appalling things the ISA has done. Because if you have something that's that high a risk, the likelihood that you don't see it as you're walking up to that tree is almost zero. And if the risk is that small that a branch might fall whilst you're under it and might hit you and might kill you, then I say die with honor. It's time we took away the stupidity. Ms. Russo stopped smiling, but it's true. I don't know why we've done this. When I was a young arborist, 1970s, we weren't thinking about risk assessment. There were no risk assessment systems. Risk wasn't an issue with trees. It was obvious that the tree was dangerous, or you didn't get rid of it because it was expensive. There weren't that many tree contractors out there, and they made huge money. And it was horrible stuff, and they didn't like doing it. So oftentimes trees were left and just bits were dealt with. I remember going up trees, Peter, you might remember about these days, but going up, cutting off the fruiting body and grinding out all the decay. Oh, dreadful, horrible things we did to trees. So yes, I think it takes time for things to change, and you only need one person saying, hey, look, this is bad. And I was at a conference last year, I won't say where because I don't want to embarrass the people, having given a talk about the problems of tree risk assessment and common faults that happen. Somebody stood up on the last day and gave a presentation about risk in trees that almost mirrored every fault that we'd talked about. And I sat there and thought, it's amazing. And that person is a highly regarded person, respected, but held on to values that were 40 and 50 years old. Oh yes, you've got to clear out the cavity. If you don't have a cavity, you've got phalaenus, you've got to get rid of the tree. In fact, only last month I had a gentleman come to me and said, Mark, you've recommended, there's a phalaenus fruiting body at the base of the tree. You've identified it, you've photographed it, you put it in your report, and you've recommended just monitoring. And the arborist that's come out to do the work on the school's seen it, and he said the tree should be removed. And I'm thinking, Why? There's almost no decay. It's so easy to check and monitor. I can tap the trunk. It's at, you know, 1.5 meters in height. It's a perfect spot for a Valinus sporocarp. Why would I want to mess with it? Just monitor. So hopefully that gives you some views. It will take decades to change, and you will deal with biases both ways. The hard thing is wanting to be respectful of those people that just seem to be so far out of touch with reality. The council arborist that says to me, no, you've got more than a 10% encroachment, that's not acceptable. Or the tree's got codominant stems with included bark, you need to get rid of the tree. I mean, yeah, I get it, you're really worried about it. Why can't you subordinate one half and leave the other half and eventually remove the worst of the two stems if you had to do something? I don't want to, but you could. So yes, question? Peter.
Yeah, Mike, just more of a comment. I mean, I'm council arborist now, and I think a lot of it's the NIMBY stuff. It's, you know, I love trees, but, you know, that's what we deal with most. And yeah, that's the hard one, really.
Yeah, and I get that people love trees, but they should all be planted in a reserve. They should be somewhere else. They shouldn't be near a house. The butts keep on going, and the butts are artificial. I like beds, and I'm prepared to accept the risk associated with sleeping on. I like food that I can chew, and I'm prepared to accept the risk associated with it. I like going into the beach, and I accept the risk associated with sharks. I mean, you know, fairly small risk, but it's there. I like driving. I accept that driving, when I drive to Queensland, drive to Melbourne, my preferred way of transiting, I am engaging in a higher risk activity than if I took a commercial flight. Okay? We have to accept there's a whole pile of things. And the buts and the ands, I just got a paper last week, a wonderful paper that showed that where there are more trees, there is less loneliness. Now, you can see why I live in Shanes Park, where there's only a few % canopy cover, because I hate people. But all jokes aside, we forget how even social fabric is altered by trees. If we start adding it up, adding these values in, as I said before, we come up to about $10 or so per square metre of crown in life-saving health benefits. Before we look about academic improvement, before we talk about healing time from injuries, and before we talk about social things, before we talk about reduction in crime, the list keeps on going on. And the biggest harm that's almost always done if the tree is healthy and it's not actively falling, swaying in the ground, actively splitting, you know, shell wall being eaten out by a fire or some fungi that's spreading faster, or termites. I came across termites in the Northern Territory that are just plain gruesome. If it's not into one of those categories, then the greatest harm we do is removing the tree. We don't think about the risk reduction sides that come with trees. Reduce melanomas, reduce asthma, reduce diabetes, reduce dementia, health benefits that are now well documented. We forget all about those all of a sudden, and we say, oh yes, but somebody else will provide those for us. Somebody else on a block of land down the road will have all the trees that we need. And I know I've talked about it before. Tepper, an Australian gentleman who worked for the Department of Agriculture. Now, I'll get the year wrong. I think it's 1898. It's either 1898 or 1896 again. All that late 1800 stuff was amazing. And he worked out that we needed about 1/3 of our crown cover, canopy cover back in, that resulted in the Pareto's principle of environmental benefits. So how do you get most of the benefits of trees? 1/3 canopy cover. And here we are in 2026, and we're still aiming at 1/3 canopy cover. Awesome. Congratulations, society. You should hang your head in shame. and go suck on tailpipe exhaust and die, because you've done nothing to really get there. And no, please, I don't mean you go and do that, but I'm saying it's a disgrace that we have this as an objective and we don't. 100 years to achieve it, 30 or 40 years to achieve it, that's shameful. 10 or 15 years. And those of you who work for councils, if you can convince your council, I have a way of doing it, and that is every time you remove a tree, you should look at replacing the canopy within 10 years. And if they can't plant that number of trees on their property, then they should pay for the offset of it elsewhere. Now, if it's a weed species, you might want to drop that lower. If it's critically endangered or, something endemic, you might want to rate it higher. If you want to rate it higher, then what you have to do is biomass replacement within 10 years. Biomass replacement in 10 years is a big number of trees. And you start to realize that, in 15 or 20 years' time, you could have significantly more canopy by just simply valuing the canopy different. And I'm not talking about anything that's specifically wonderful. Bailey Hudson proposed it in the late 1990s or mid-1990s. He said that every place that has a car registered to it should have a certain number of large trees, and if they don't, they should pay more in city taxes. I know in South Australia, one council has recently mooted looking at giving rates discounts for people that have a certain number of trees or a certain canopy area, and extras for those that have no trees. So the person that has no trees starts paying more and pays more for the city to provide those trees. Now that's a wonderfully interesting concept. Again, it's achievable. It takes politics. It takes playing the game, but it's doable. So let's quickly go to some questions from the group. Dominic, you asked a quick question by text and I saw it dash up and disappear. Do you want to ask it verbally? Dominic Gray. Oh no, I saw it there somewhere.
Yeah, sorry, I was just
Yep.
I'm just doing the dishes while I'm listening, and
Good man.
computer's at the other end of the house. The study you
Yes,
mentioned some
the
studies
article.
that show that acute codominant unions with included bark are no more likely to fail than a quote-unquote healthy normal tree in cyclonic wind. Do you know what that study is? So I can look it up, but I'd love
Yes,
to reference it.
I have done it previously and shared it. And Peter, I don't know whether we've got it in our Dropbox that's shared it around. But
I don't think so.
Hauer et al. Played with it out of Florida. And I think it's called, I'll be able to find it fast enough.
Do you say Power et al?
Hauer.
Oh, Hauer.
Rich Hauer. Rich is a great guy. And these guys are just playing some fantastic games out of Florida. So if I go to my S drive and look at risk and look at papers, and I know it's something to do with, is it a risk or is it a, no, Koeser, Hauer, and a few others did it. If you need me to, email me and I will find that for you. Or actually, email Peter and I'll flick it up to Peter, and then he can forward it out to anyone that wants a copy of it and put it in our Dropbox. We do have a group Dropbox somewhere, and Peter will be able to share that link with you.
Yep, I can do that.
Yeah, if you could, Peter, because I haven't heard of the Dropbox before tonight. That would be interesting to peruse.
Okay, it's just got some basic things there. Amongst other things, if you haven't played with it, one of my favorite tools is there, and that's the .dic file. It's a dictionary file with 35,000 different plant names in the dictionary file that helps you spell plant names correctly. And if you spell like I do, that really does make a difference. Do you know families only got one L? When did that happen? I always thought it had two. And so I do use it. I use Word. Peter doesn't. He uses Affinity software.
That's right.
and talked about Affinity on a number of occasions. And young Chris, who works for me, said, do you know Affinity is now free if you've got a free Canva account? So if you've got a free Canva account, you can access Affinity now for free. That's a well-priced software, if you ask me.
And it does have a spell checking facility that you can leave on and checks your spelling. And if you have an unusual word or you have a new word, you can teach it to your dictionary.
So there'll be a way of adding a file. So I should look at that, Peter, and see if I can write a batch file or a retitle the file so that they can access the entire thing through Affinity as well. Affinity, Peter will tell you, Affinity does a lot better job of laying documents out to look good. WordWrite's
it's
really good.
Much easier to write in, yes, and some of the issues that Word have aren't a problem with that program.
Like rolling tables and rolling captions underneath you. All of a sudden you move your page down and by half a page, and the image you put in has the caption now or back up the top, and horrible. And so the work around that, if you use Word, is you've got to put all your images and captions inside table, a single cell table, or multi-cell if you're using multi-cells. So again, there are workarounds, but it's Peter's laughing because it's so archaic. You think by now they would have figured that out, but they haven't. And this is a problem that's existed with Word for, I'm getting old, Peter, 2005, 21 years, something like that, that we've been using Word for.
Just one more quick question, if you don't mind, because it just popped in my mind while you were talking. I recently connected with a arborist here in Canberra, Sean Gentry. He was telling me about a tool that you've shown him. It's a root biomass calculator. So if you're doing root pruning and you know how many roots you have and what size they are, you can help estimate what percentage of root system you're cutting off from the tree.
Yep. Feel free to reach out. It's available. It's public domain. The story of it was I had a client who was a Qantas pilot whose wife did childcare centres. So they were developing a childcare centre. Council said, no, we don't want you to cut those roots. It'll cause problems, too great an encroachment. And he said, is there any way we could deal with this? So I said, well, we could look at it allometrically and come up with a calculator. And he said, well, why don't you do that? And I said, time and money. He said, well, I'm paying, go do it, make it publicly available. And so we did. We went out and developed the calculator, came up with the supporting argument behind it, and then produced that. So the root loss calculator is available just to a link. If you contact Peter, I know that he should have a link to it, but I'm happy to share it if you contact me directly.
Yeah, I'm happy to share.
Yeah. And hopefully he's got the right version of it. And the second page is equally as fun. The second page determines the percentage loss associated. So if you say, I want to only lose 1% in any one root, and that's all I want lost, well, 1% is nothing because I could lose 30 roots that size. But you said 1% is what I want to lose, and you put the trunk diameter in, it'll tell you the size of the root.
Fascinating. So it works both ways then.
Yeah. So you can use it to say, what's a sensible size? You know, if I've got a tree with a 60 centimeter diameter trunk, saying cutting a 1 centimeter root is irrelevant. If I've got a tree with a 1 centimeter diameter trunk, cutting a root with a 1 centimeter diameter is really pertinent. So
Sure.
It allows you to have a threshold for a particular tree, which is a sensible thing. Now, a lot of cities just have a standard threshold, but then it doesn't make sense that I'm worrying about a 2 centimeter root if it's a 1.2 meter diameter tree. That's just a nothingness. It's probably 0.01. You know, I could go out and cut 1,000 of them, and I'm going to have some troubles at that time, but I'm not going to find 1,000. So yes, it's available, Dominic. I'm happy to share. Okay, let me go to the horrible infinity screen, not affinity, infinity. It says, don't do this, share, entire screen, share. And it should start bouncing up. There it does. Don't do it again. It says, I won't. And we had a number of people sending questions. some neat ones, and I think I've got them unless Peter sent through some more. First one, someone asked a question about some fig psyllids. They've said, I'm in Shellhaven. Yes, Shellhaven without the tree policy, so it's more of a hole than a shaven, of a whole shaven approach. But anyhow, a lot of small leaf figs have succumbed to what I assume is fig psyllid. Our latest one, over 45 metres in canopy diameter, was given up, and many other small and large ones have been badly hit, some recovering slowly. Is there any literature that I can find? Psyllid is usually only found on Moreton Bay figs. The answer is yes. Psyllid is usually only found on Moreton Bay figs. So great observation. And so the question is it fig psyllid at all? And I don't know. We haven't got any photographs yet, have we, Peter?
No, we haven't.
Okay, so I asked back. And the next thing is common names are difficult. So small leaf fig, I assume he's talking about Ficus virens. And
Or obliqua.
Or obliqua, yeah.
Virens isn't really a small leaf.
Yeah, sorry, obliqua. You're right. Thanks, Peter. A Ficus obliqua. Or could be Hanenia. Sorry, Kath.
Microphylla.
Microcarpa, is
Microcarpa.
it? Ficus microcarpa variety, Helii.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not endemic to the Shellhaven region, and a 45-metre one there would be unusual.
Mhm.
So certainly he's talking about one of the local figs. I've not seen fig psyllid at any level except on really stressed trees, and predominantly on Ficus rubiginosa outside of macrophylla. Macrophylla will do real damage too. But for the sake of it, first thing, always try and identify what the problem is. Don't assume. Go have a look, get more information. Maybe it's a new species of psyllid that's causing problems, and that happens. It's not that it's not a pre-existing insect. It's that somehow or other it's been brought in from another area, probably native to Australia, and it's causing damage. And we saw that, for example, if you're in the East Coast with winter bronzing bug, Thermostochorus peregrinus was a native insect, or lily-pilly psyllid, if you've seen that on a lily-pilly hedge, again native to Australia, described in the late 1800s, and didn't become a problem until early this century. Somebody introduced it slowly, numbers built up, and then it became a major problem. So I don't think it's fig psyllid, but the easiest way to control fig psyllids, apart from chemical control, is leave the leaves. And that's the hardest bit for people to do. The reason why I leave the leaves is there are a number of parasitoid wasps. These are wasps that lay an egg inside the psyllid, and eventually kills the psyllid. And when you rake the leaves up, you take away the parasitoids. So you want to leave the leaves, use them as a mulch, rake them up nearby, don't throw them away. Figs usually will recover from a psyllid hit, and so the fact that the recovery is slow makes me wonder. The other insect that does a lot of damage to figs, and is more my preferred option here, is the native fig leaf beetle. There are two species. They destroy my edible fig. They destroy every fig that I've got on the property, because we won't eradicate them. I could. I'm just not into that process yet. You can use a whole pile of native sprays that will deal with things from spraying the young are laid in clusters on the leaf. And this is a Crismillidae, or a leaf-eating insect. And again, you can get online. Sean Tallant's got a nice little fact sheet at on native fig leaf beetle that you can go have a look at. Or again, if you ask Peter, I can flick you up one. So that's my gut level feeling. I want to know what the problem is, but I'm not happy with just I think it might be, or what I assume is just a really bad way, and it's not critical. It's just we often don't get the time, we don't get the resources. I feel sorry for local government, but fig trees are important trees to society, got strong social connections. So I would be wanting to get an elevated work platform, get a climber out there, get some way of finding out what we've got. The other thing that figs are prone to is the mosquito borer. And so where there's a fig that's in the way of a view, the old mosquito borer seems to do a good job of coming in. So I want to look for that. And people are really cunning in terms of trying to hide that. But the damage is usually obvious on figs if you just look carefully enough. So that's that one. Now, I don't know what I did wrong there. But I've deleted my ability to just reopen. There we are. That's it. Okay, good. And that one we did, Peter. I think that's the only other question you had.
I thought there was another one that came in
a
week or so ago.
I'm pretty sure there was a second one, Peter.
And I do have another question for you as well. I'll just send that to you now.
Fig tree psyllid. And Carl Hill shared in on that fig psyllid one. His comment was, no, he felt it was the same. So he thought it was interesting because his view was that he felt that that seemed an odd diagnosis. So keep that in mind. Again, just so you get an idea, not every ArborMentor gets on, but Kyle had shared that back through the email thread. The mentors get a separate email group. And Peter, you said you've got one coming to me now.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, I'll just check. There'll be 100 unanswered emails when I open it up because I haven't been. I don't know how you guys treat emails, but I'm old-fashioned. I remember letters.
Can you explain how trees take in oxygen? Is it primarily through stomata, lenticels, or roots, or a combination of all three?
Oh, great question.
If they collect oxygen from elsewhere, i.e. stomata and lenticels, why are pore spaces in the soil so vital for root respiration?
Oh, great question. Wonderful question. Okay. Really easy to deal with it.
That's from Lisa.
From Lisa?
Yeah.
Lisa Barnes?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great question from Lisa. First of all, gaseous exchange is really important in trees. The most important gas is not oxygen, it's carbon dioxide. There is a waste product from photosynthesis. That waste product is that horrible, nasty pollutant gas called oxygen. Okay, so oxygen's put out through the leaves. Carbon dioxide is taken in the way that carbon dioxide gets into the leaves. Stomata opens, gases diffuse fairly well. Carbon dioxide gets in. It dissolves with the water on the mesophyll cell walls. Then it's taken across the cell wall and used in the process up in the thylakoid membrane. So able to move across a membrane. I'm not sure of the process of it moving across membrane. My guesstimate is there's got to be some pore or protein that allows for its transport. It's something I've never looked at, but that's a wonderful Gemini discussion on the way to Mudgee tomorrow. So I'll have it figured out by the time I get back, hopefully. But in terms of elsewhere, it goes through the bark. We have these wonderful things called lenticels, and they're responsible for gaseous exchange. Then we have lenticels and roots. Those roots have bark, and bark has lenticels. And if you want to see it, dig up a fig root or dig up a mulberry root, moraceae, they're really obvious. Prunus is another one they're fairly obvious on. And you can see the lenticels in the roots as well. The problem is there's no transport system in general from the leaves to the roots. So to move gas around is a problem. And it's a problem because if we put it into the xylem, the movement is upwards, so that's not going to work. If we put it into the phloem, I guess it could move, but we've got this oxygen gas. I mean, what do we do to make it go downwards? How do we control it? But when there's low oxygen levels, a lot of plants have different methods of dealing with it. One of the common thing is a process called controlled cell death. Or more appropriately, apoptosis, lovely little word, means death of cells essentially. And we make things like pneumatophores or big open chambers that allow for the movement of gases. And really common, for example, in rainforest species, really common through the Amazon. Some great text on the subject. Why? Because things that get flooded need a way of dealing with gases exchange. Otherwise, you risk interrupting respiration. So all living cells respire, and respiration uses oxygen. If you stop respiration through lack of oxygen, you start producing another end byproduct, and that byproduct's alcohol. Now, I know it sounds like that would be great. The trees would get drunk and they'd all be happy. But the reality is alcohol is anti-living. It's an antibiotic. It'll kill living things. And so we don't want to produce alcohol. Now, some plants have a different way of dealing with things. For example, they can start off with malates and use malates to deal with things. So there are different mechanisms for addressing that oxygen shortage, but for most trees that becomes problematic, particularly trees that haven't developed or evolved in a high moisture environment. So dry region trees that get saturated can have real problems with it. If you get a rainforest species and it gets saturated, it just says, well, that was going to happen 5, 6, 8, 10 times this year when the rainfall got heavy enough that the soil got saturated. When the soil gets saturated, gaseous exchange is reduced. And the time that takes is about 2 or 3 hours. So movement of gases through soil is quick. Movement of gases through water is slow. It's water that becomes the issue. Now, when I say it's quick, it's not quick enough to keep me alive. Don't bury me in a coffin and test the theory. It's too slow. But the respiration rate of cells in a plant is a lot slower than the respiration rate in a person. And so people have problems. Now, you can think about this. Insects aren't the fastest respirers and not the slowest, but they don't waste energy. We waste energy and that produces heat, and our body has to do that. So we respire a hell of a lot. But insects don't, and there are these insects in Australia called cicadas, and they're nymphs, live in the ground and survive quite happily on the oxygen that's in the ground. Now, again, you can go out and put an insect in water and it'll survive for a number of hours without oxygen, but there's a limit. And I don't know what that limit is, but I know the same thing happens in Sydney with the Sydney funnel web spider. It gets into people's swimming pools and it'll survive well and truly over a day in the swimming pool. I don't want to find out how long. I don't want to do that experiment, but it's a lot slower is the answer. So things are a lot slower in the way that plant cells work. So if you're getting flooded regularly, you'll tend to develop a thing called an erenchymal root. And pneumatophores are just a special form of erenchymal root. These are roots that are aimed at allowing for movement of oxygen. And it often involves this process, usually involves this process of apoptosis. So cell walls dying that creates tubes that allow for movement. They're not continuous tubes like you might see if you look inside the root of a lotus. The root of a lotus is wonderful. You can see that swamp dwelling plant with big tubes, big hollows for conduction of gases. They're a lot smaller, but they're still there. And quite a number of our, as I said, rainforest species, our marine species do it. All our mangroves have these pneumatophores. If you look at taxodium, those knees are again involved in this process of gaseous exchange. And if you want your knees to grow big on taxodium, they need to be in an area that's flooded more frequently, and they'll grow bigger. If it's flooded infrequently, then they won't grow as big. They'll still grow occasionally when things get really wet. But if it's inundated 9 months of the year, you'll find those knees just do wonderful. And then if you go down to the bayous, you'll see that they can get quite huge. Happy with that?
Yeah. So just to clarify, so essentially what you're saying, Mark, is that the pore spaces in the soil are essential for root respiration and where they get oxygen. But yeah, so and,
yes,
and
the rate of
isn't particularly it's not going to be distributed down to the roots through the phloem vessel if say that the soil's inundated or it's compacted. There's no sort of transfer of oxygen from the stomata or from the lenticels down to the roots.
very little, unless it's one of those species that develop these arenchymal type roots,
Yeah.
in which case they will deal with it. But remember, the rate of movement is a lot slower.
Yeah.
The rate of requirement is a lot slower than what we think of in human terms. So, you know, it may well be that it takes hours and hours and hours and hours to go down half a meter. Remembering, here's one of the important things to remember about the chemistry of it all, is that the end result of respiration is carbon dioxide. When it rains, carbon dioxide gets dissolved in water and creates a vacuum, a small chemical vacuum. And so it pulls more in. When water moves down, it acts as a suction unit and it pulls air down. So even on heavy clays, pug clays, there's movement of oxygen. It's not as great. And one great spot you can see it is when you're driving along country roads, you'll often see cut throughs in the mounds. You'll sort of, the road will be down 1 meter, 2 meters, 5 meters, whatever. And you can see the differences in the color of the red. At the top of the mound, it'll be red in our clays, and that's because it's highly oxygenated. As you move down, it'll turn orangey, and as you get down lower, it'll turn more gray. That's all about the amount of oxygen. The other thing that happens is as roots grow and die, they leave channels behind. And again, they tend to allow for connectivity. But if you're constantly saturating something that doesn't want to be constantly saturated and isn't well adapted to it, it'll die. If you constantly compact the surface so that it doesn't allow gaseous exchange, you'll have an impact. If you're just compacting a component of it, like you're putting a driveway over a root system, it's only for a portion. Either side's going to do well, but you get roots growing underneath roads. You know, I commonly get told you don't, but I've done enough lifting concrete up in my days on development sites and found roots so that they're there. The density drops down, but that density is largely dropping down through anything through lack of water or reduced water than it is through reduced oxygen movement. The other thing you'll notice, oddly enough, is trees in really dry conditions in concrete openings will sometimes perform better than trees growing in grass. And the reason for that is grass is a better competitor for water. And so water is still number one big chemical problem. And compacting soil affects trees by making it harder for water to get in during those small downbursts of, you know, a few millimeters that would normally get some water down. The tree loses that, and it may take a fair time to get water in. So often it's not oxygen. And we used to think that oxygen was a problem when we built soil up around trees. But the research has now shown that the problem with building soil up is the interface. When I create a fine layer over a coarse layer, I create a waterproof layer over the top, and that waterproof layer then is the killer, not anything else, because that water layer then reduces. Air moves a lot slower through water than it does through the soil.
Okay.
And again, you can start looking up those figures in general from something like AI will find it for you fairly quickly. How quickly does gas diffuse through water? How quickly does gas diffuse through the air? Oxygen, how quickly does it go through soil? And that'll give you some comparative idea of where the issues are. If we get saturation, that creates a bigger problem.
Okay. Thank you.
My pleasure. Great question, though. Wonderful question. And again, if you get the chance to start looking at some of these things, just even on the internet, what's an Arenkeimer root look like in cross section, and what we're talking about, how these connections are done. It's worthwhile getting some visuals to go with the mental concept.
Yeah, I will. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
Yes, Peter's got one, which I tried to email to you, but I don't know that it got to you.
Have a look.
My question relates to tree risk and branch aspect ratio.
So basically what we're talking about before with codominance, and I found it's confusing when you find papers, and this one that I sent basically says if it's over 0.7 or 0.8 aspect ratio, it's half as strong as a union with lower things. But I think it's not based on not enough data.
Peter, look, it's interesting.
Yeah.
What we are looking at there is absolute strength rather than adequacy of strength. And it's a real difficult concept for us as arborists to deal with. So if I talk about a hollow tree, we get a tree that's lost a whole pile of strength. The question is not how much strength has it lost, so how much weaker is it, but how much does it need to do its job? And in the second bit, adequacy of strength, it's more than adequate. And so that's a real problem. The paper that, let me see if I can find it whilst we're talking. The paper that I was telling you about that looked at codominant stems, looked at the aspect ratio, looked at clustering of branches, and looked at overlong branches. And the paper found that in all cases, there was no significant difference in failure during cyclonic winds. And I think that gives you a good benchmark for adequacy, is what happens during cyclonic winds. Let me just see if I can find for you the name of the paper very quickly. Control F over no, don't do that. Control Windows key, Control F, isn't it, Peter? Don't trust me. Control F. Yep. OVR extend. Okay, yep, here we have it. Koeser, Klein, Hauer. I'll blow it right up on the screen so you can have a look at it whilst we're talking. And I'll close that one down. You would. There we are. Koeser, Klein, Hauer, Meisbauer, Freeman, Harchick, and Kane. Defective or different? Observe storm failures in 4 urban tree growth patterns, forest. I'm pretty sure that's the one that covers all those issues.
Can you put it in our Dropbox, Mark, or get Peter to?
Yeah.
Please.
You sure it's not already there?
I would tell you how to find it, just so that you don't. There's the name of it. Control C, copy.
Yep.
Down to why I love Google.
Yep. Where are you?
I think Mark's dropped out.
You pressed the wrong button.
Maybe.
Oh, here he is. Hi.
Yep. Okay, that was silly. Not the brightest boy on occasions. Entire screen. And yes, I want to share it. It says don't, but I will. And you should be able to see my screen now. Put that into Google Scholar as a search.
What is it? Observe. Sorry.
I didn't like that at all. Your computer network may be sending out automated queries.
I found a copy of it. I could put a web link in the group chat if people want.
Yeah, there we are. It's there. There we are. There's a copy of it there. ResearchGate, if you're on ResearchGate.
No.
So that it's nothing. Yep, there's the full paper. It's available there. So just put that defective or different, and just put urban tree growth patterns, and that'll be enough to find it for you.
Just on this, Mark, because now that I've finished studying, I want to start compiling a professional library of paper books. And because I just finished a school survey today, and I saw a number of trees with hollows in them, and I recommended let's do an aerial inspection just to see how big the hollow is before we make any drastic decisions. But is there what materials could I use? So because hopefully they ask me to do the aerial inspections, and I say there's the cross section is this much, is now this much wood remaining with the tree is essentially now a pipe with an internal thickness of so much. And what material could I use to then estimate the strength that is there to then
look, I'm going to be
about what you're saying with adequacy of strength?
It's a great question, Dominic. First thing is it's a cavity, so I wouldn't have done an aerial inspection unless there's something really weird about that cavity, like it's more than a 1/3 opening, and there's indications of something odd. The reason why
big cavities.
Yeah, I've got over 1,000 in schools, and I've had one fail in 12 years. So
Okay.
that's 12,000 cavity years, one failed. And the question is, did that fail because of the cavity or for other things? And in that case, it was a 2/3 loss of opening. So it was a cavity with a tri-dominant stem in the middle of all three.
I reckon the cavities. Yeah, because I don't, just because I see a cavity doesn't mean I say send me up there, but I'd say the cavities I've recommended, there's only 3 in probably 500 trees, and I would say that they're missing, I'd say around the 2/3 mark, one of them probably more than 2/3.
Yeah, so
they're decent cavities.
2/3 opening is a worry. But so first thing I start saying, trees seldom fail at the cavity opening. And if you want a great one on this, Dominic, you got some time spare. Next month, I think it is, in Hobart, there is the ISA's conference, and Frank Rinn is speaking. Frank Rinn's also doing a one-day workshop, and he'll talk about this quite extensively. Then there's a guy from Abian, I think is the name of the company. And he will say the same thing. Everyone's starting to say the same thing. Weird as that is, cavities rarely fail. It's not that they can't. In terms of strength loss, you start with the TR formula. That's going to be a good starting point, but it's a starting point. Once you go over 0.85 meters, you can throw that in the bin. It's irrelevant. Trees with bigger than an 85 centimeter diameter trunk, you're going to have worse than that. And I have shared before, and am I sharing at the moment? I'm not.
I think we talked about this in a session quite recently, and you talked about the wood properties around the cavity where you get reaction growth. Mark, are you familiar with David Evans talks about a program called, I think, Tree Calc,
Yep.
that you can use to assess the.
We've used tree calc on the program on these things once before, I believe, and showed what tree calc looked like, and showed you how you could have 50% hollow, and again, depending on the architecture of your tree, Dominic. So, what's its exposure like? What's the wood properties like? If you had it on a Eucalyptus nicolai that was in decline, I'd say why bother? Just get rid of the tree. If you had it on a fig and it was near the base and you'd lost 95% of the inside, I'd say why are you worrying?
So it's not just a matter of looking at that hole in the tree, the cavity. That's only a place to start. That doesn't really mean anything by itself. And I think people run into problems with starting and stopping at looking at the hole in the tree.
Yeah, something I always look for is swelling, because swelling typically indicates response growth. And when I see a cavity with response growth all around it, I'm feeling a whole lot better.
The fact is that, as Mark said, trees rarely violet the cavity. So unless it's a massive cavity and all the other things that boxes that tick, then don't worry about it.
The first thing is the tree healthy. That's the number one thing. If the tree is healthy, and I'm not trying to anthropomorphize, but I am in intent. Trees are intelligent. Biochemically, they're incredibly well adapted to take in senses of what's happening and adjust. And if you saw the things they can do, and Dominic, go back through some of the episodes. I know there was one not very long ago. I showed you the cellular change in direction to make the wood stronger. You see how they're doing it at a cellular level. If it's producing adaptive growth, that's great. If it's not producing adaptive growth, the question you need to answer is, does the tree need to produce adaptive growth, or is it strong enough? The big one that comes to an issue where it comes to strength is wall thickness. If the wall thickness gets too thin, you can get the hose pipe or the flattening failure that Matic talks about, like bending a hose pipe. And that'll tend to be associated with shear cracks going up and down. So if you see shear cracks or cracks, vertical cracks on the outside going up and down, producing, again, what Matic politely calls wine barreling, then you're going to think about that. If you go to Western Australia, to Perth, and you see an agonus that's more than 50 or 60 years old, you'll see all these fluted ribs on the trunk. So they look like long tubes going up and down. And it's sure as hell, every bit of the inside of it split and hollow. Let me see if I can quickly share with you an image that might help.
You're referencing Matic there. The book, is it the
Encyclopedia of the Body Language of Trees by Matic?
Yes. Is that book still current today? Like, is it worth me investing in that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's worth you investing in it. And then let me challenge you with a challenge that I had on it. I thought I had a copy behind me on the desk, but don't. I had a young barrister in a court case ask that question, and grabbed a copy of it and read it during his Christmas holidays. If a barrister can read it, we sure as hell should. It's very recent. Can you hear me and see me there?
Yes, we can.
Yep. Okay, great. I'm just going to go to photos and see if I can open up and whether I've got wine barreling saved.
Yeah, because sorry, Peter.
If the wall thickness of the trunk is very thin and you start getting vertical cracks, that's something to be aware of. But if you get transfer cracks appearing as well, then it's time to think carefully about it.
And I seldom see transverse cracks, but they're a worry one. So this one here is a Eucalyptus microcoreus. This is one from Wallingbar. And you can see here, these have all split out. So these are all these sinuses have failed. And the other one is this one here. This is just a delightful sample. Let me see if I can zoom in for you. I can. I just learned how to do that. For those of you who don't know, I have smart people around me. I'm not that smart. But if you go control and roll your mouse upwards on a PC, it'll make it larger. So this here was all once in the middle. This is this Melaleuca that has been pushed and cracked to the point that every little bit has broken apart. Okay, so just because things are going wrong doesn't necessarily mean weak. The tree was responding by putting on extra growth out here and putting tissue on further out from the trunk. That adaptive growth you talked about, where you see the swelling around the thing, and just brilliant engineering. In fact, we don't have buildings that engineer like that, which is why we have problems. And we have buildings that are hollow everywhere. And I've never heard anyone say, boy, my building's hollow. I better get the health and safety inspectors out to have an engineering check of it. We accept that hollows are acceptable, provided the walls bear enough of the load. And that's what the trees figured out. It did it by itself, no engineer involved. Not only did it do that, but it did it in a way that said, if things start becoming weak, if we start losing stuff here, I'll start adding extra strength out here. Why was the tree cut down? I have no idea. This is a Melaleuca. You'll see the same thing with the Gonus. You'll see the same thing with microcories. As soon as you start seeing these voids, these things called sinuses, so this is the buttressing. The sinuses are where the weakness is, and the tree's already got that figured.
Yeah, thanks, Kath. I see the book there. I've had a little bit of a running list of books I want to get, but yeah, starting to try and get onto it now. I just you mentioned the transfer cracks before. Can you remind me what those are?
Yep, I can show you what those are. One thing to talk about, another thing to see. Transverse means across the grain.
Yeah, so okay, I misheard you there. Transverse, yeah.
Transverse crack, and they're not things that we see often. I've had two in one school, but there's a transverse crack that did fail. It's in a school near the front gate. Fell, didn't do anything. There's a transverse crack. It's still there. That's the one that failed. So they're not that common.
No,
and
haven't seen one yet myself.
Yeah, look, they're there. You postulate they're there. How do you know they're there? You wait until they fail. It sounds crazy, but most places that trees aren't over high use areas. They're over lower use areas. And so we get into a habit of panicking more than we need to. I'll show you another one.
Just while you're
go on.
Just while you're searching, because the reason I asked earlier about I guess in a perfect world, what's the threshold for enough wall thickness to support the tree for the hollow you're looking at? Because in my studies, no one has actually presented to us as a class, here's an approximate way of looking at wall thickness in a cavity and being able to think, is this enough or is this not enough? And I'd like to have some understanding so that when I do see a cavity in a tree, I can be like, how much of a concern is this from a wall? There are other factors, but I would like to develop my understanding from a wall thickness point of view as well.
You would like a diagnostometer. It's the device you plug into a tree that gives you the answers. The answer I'll give you is that if it's a healthy tree, it'll probably be dealing with it. Just to give you an idea, this is not the best shot of it, but this is an internal crack. The tree's cracked at this point. It's been a transverse crack on the top side of a branch. The tree's just simply stitched things back together and kept going. Harris talks about this in his 1984 edition of Arboriculture, so we've known about it for quite some time. Trees are able to self-optimize and strengthen themselves up, do so beautifully. This is a crack because of loss of strength, but this is snow loading and wind loading. So Good luck seeing it. I don't have a photograph of it on my own collection. This is an image that someone shared with me. This is overloaded, and this is that wine barreling occurring.
Yeah.
It's not my shot. Somebody else took it, I forget who, and shared it with me. It was really nice of them. So you don't tend to see those things very often. Wine barreling, what else is it? Hose pipe failure. Let's try hose pipe as well. So the answer is, if I don't see it very often, and there are thousands of trees out there with these things, why do I have the concern? And I'll put it another way. You can benchmark. If you pick an average sort of site occupancy, hose pipe, maybe it's one word. If you don't see them very often, they're probably not likely to be something that we need to be concerned about. And Dominic, you go back through some of the old things. We've talked about this previously. About one tree in every 5,000 you see will be a tree that has a risk that's elevated to a level that we need to think about it. Do you see cavities more than once in every 5,000 trees?
Sorry, so do I see cavities in more than 1 in 5,000?
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry. Yes. Sorry.
Yes. So cavities
I'm
probably not a
tired.
thing we need to worry about.
Sorry, say that again.
Okay. If we look at the numbers, and it's a number wang, as David Evans would describe it. If we look at numbers, and we try and get a curve that matches what our fatality rates are versus the number of trees, we start to say that about 1 in 5,000 trees is a tree that would enliven us to want to do a risk assessment and come up with an answer that was, it's elevated. It's more than 1 in a million. Okay, it's a bigger risk than we'd want it to be.
Yeah. Okay. I'm with you now. Yeah.
And if we're looking at then the stage where we really should be doing something, 1 in 10,000, the answer is the numbers are about 1 in 500,000. So a hollow wouldn't normally be something that fits in the one tree in every 500,000. I say that because I look after, I don't know, probably 100,000 trees, and I've got about 1,000 cavities. So about one tree in every 100 has a cavity.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm with you now.
that's not in that 1 in 5,000 group. That's got to be something different. One tree in every 100 or so probably has an overextended branch. Therefore, overextended branches aren't what I'm looking for. This is what I'm looking for. That's a worry. And
I'm with you. Yeah.
we'd say, oh, that's a rarity. And so those transverse fractures, the reason I've got so few is they're not common. If I go to TORTIONA, torsional failure, I think I spelled that right. No, probably not for me. Yeah, torsional failures. So that's where it's twisted.
Mm-hmm.
Here's one in a park in Queensland. Happened about 7 or 8 years before I saw it. Trees dealing with it. Here's one on an araucaria. The branch was still there. It had to be cut out. Where else can I find you? That's a pretty nasty one. I would say that probably merits, and that's because the branch has been twisted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Damn it. That's at Hamilton Cottage. It's still there as far as I know. There it is there. And that's David Evans. It is Hamilton Cottage. So, yeah, cracks are more of a problem than cavities. And yet cracks don't don't fail all the time. Just amazing what doesn't fail, not what fails. Hopefully that gives you some confidence.
Yeah,
But
it does.
again, and I don't want to be rude, Dominic, I want
Yeah, go
to
for
say
it.
it to you so that others listening can hear, the lack of experience and the lack of spending time with people that are doing this has an influence. And I'll invite you, I don't know where in the country you are, by your accent, you're in Australia. You're free to come up and spend some time with me out looking at trees. Happy to do it with you. Happy to show you how I walk past trees that drive other arborists crazy. You know, why I'm happy to have lemon scented gums in high use areas. Happy to go through all of that.
Where are you based, Mark? Are you north of Sydney?
I'm in the western suburbs out near the base of the Blue Mountains.
Oh, right out that way. Okay.
Right out that way, all that far away. For those of you in Western Australia
I'm in
listening,
Canberra. Everything's far away.
Oh, you're in Canberra. That's right. You know, Dominic, you're local.
Yeah, I'm only 3 hours. Yeah,
Yeah, 3 hours drive.
I'll take you up on that offer this year.
Yeah, and you'll see that, you know, here's a small hollow in a tree that I looked at. I tapped the tree and I couldn't even be bothered recording it. Now, there's already, you can see some slight swelling. The tree's already, it's a healthy tree. It's in a spot where I can see it visually. I'm not even going to record it down. Can't be bothered with it. In fact, the only reason I record half the things I record in schools for monitoring is the schools have asked for it, not because it's needed. And why they ask for it? Because arborists have told them that's what they need. It's like, and I'll say this and then I'm going to call it the night, inventories. The reason we produce inventories with risk assessments is for one reason and one reason only. What's that?
Make money for the arborist.
Yeah, make money for the arborist.
By tree work.
If you've done track, there's no requirement for an inventory. If you've done QTRA, there's no requirement for an inventory. If you've done valid, there's no requirement for an inventory. Well, then why do we do an inventory? Because it looks good. It allows us to do all these other things. What's the purpose of an inventory? An inventory is to help you make management decisions better. What management decisions do you make on the basis of the inventory? I go to schools where there's 6 different tags, 6 different inventories, and they've never been used. If you said to me, I can tell you the species that give you more problems in deadwood production. It's going to be camphor laurel, it's going to be Eucalyptus microcories, it's going to be Eucalyptus saligna, Eucalyptus grandis. Wow. And then I start looking for patterns and I say, oh, closed forest species, yep, okay, produce more dead branches. Eucalyptus mollicana, woodland species, less of a problem. And so that's useful information, but they didn't get that out of their data set. Sure. Why? Because arborists collect the data just because they've got to do something that looks good. In 2014, the New South Wales Department of Education said every tree must be inspected in every school. Half the reports came back in, according to those that went through the data afterwards, with an inventory. And they said, that seems like a good thing to do. Tree risk assessments should have an inventory. Why? If I wanted an inventory about badly behaved students in a school, and I went to the principal and I said, tell me about badly behaved students in the school, what their behavioral problems are and how to deal with it. And he gave me a list of every student with all their good behaviors that don't have bad problems. I'd fire his sorry ass. Okay? Why? Because that's not what I asked him to do. Don't waste my time. Give me what I asked for. So give me, now, I'm not against inventories, but the critical issue with inventories are the information you collect. And most people that want an inventory want to collect more information than they need. Genus species, if you can do it, genus, you should be able to. Species, sometimes problematic. Sometimes genus is problematic, so okay, just tree spur. Couple of photographs of it. Diameter, DSH as it is now, diameter is standard height. You can tell a whole pile of things from the diameter. A whole pile of metrics you can work out. You don't need much more. And if you have to, tree health. Now, if you're like me, you're useless at tree health because you look at the tree and the tree looks healthy, and next year later you come past and it's dead, You look at the tree and it's almost dead. It's a eucalypt. It's got almost no foliage left, and you say it's gone. And 5 years later, you go back and the damn thing's in full leaf, and you sit there and think, well, okay, I probably shouldn't be doing this job. So health is not as good or reliable indicator. Vitality is, and it's not worth measuring vitality. Okay, you can do it, not worth doing. So take that out of the equation. I would have that information and that information only as my primary for every tree. Then I'd look at the things, Dominic, that are a concern. Now in Canberra, you're one of those lovely areas that have said every tree needs to be in inventory. And my argument is why?
And I've actually tried looking into that because I've done 3 inventories for 2 schools. Just finishing one today, writing up the notes this week.
These are public schools?
Private.
Private.
Someone else has got the contract for all the public schools.
Okay. Has someone looked at these trees before in the school? They've never had a inspection done?
No,
they probably have.
They have had previous inspections done, but due to some change in businesses, all the previous records have been lost.
Yeah. Okay, good. The inventories are so useful that they get lost.
From what I can understand with why they want me to do inventories is one for whatever insurance purposes. And I don't necessarily mean insurance company, but insurance as in risk aversion. But
but hang on a second, Dominic. Don't you have professional indemnity insurance? You're wearing the risk, not them. They've just handed it off to you. They've just said, here, we'll give you some money, you wear the risk.
As in, if a tree fails and they haven't had an arborist look at the tree, then they'll have to justify why the tree hasn't been looked at.
They don't need an inventory for me to look at the tree. I just looked at the tree. I looked at
No, they don't. And so their blanket measure is for me to look at every tree.
I do look at every tree. Okay? I look at every tree.
Yes, I do. But they want me to do an inventory.
Yes, because they're confused. And I've got to stop it because we could go on about this for hours. But they do that because that's what they've learnt they need to do. That's what they've been told. If I go back to 2012, there was no formalized risk assessments done on most of these places at all. Then along came a company, I'm not going to mention the company, and it said, hey, we can really master risk assessment. We go through, we look at all the trees, we give you the highest risk trees, work health and safety, you do those, next year we'll come back, we'll give you the next lot of highest risk trees, and we'll keep on doing that forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And that company sold for over $12 million. It's a great model for making money. Truly is. But it doesn't address the issue of risk. There's no correlation between an inventory and risk. But that company did a great job of convincing people that was a great thing to do. You could see a tag on every tree. It made it look good. Once you tag the tree the first time, how do we know you've looked at it the next time or the time after? So do we take the tags out? There's some like we do on a fire extinguisher. And whilst I'm at it, Dominic, why do fire extinguisher companies get inspected every year? I had a bus. Kath and Peter may remember the days when I had my own bus. I bought a bus to use for teaching, so I didn't have to run back to the TAFE to pick up their bus. It was a pain in the neck. So I had to have a fire extinguisher in it. Why? Well, because there could be a fire in it. Okay, great. Well, then why do I have to have it inspected twice a year? Well, you have to inspect it just in case the fire extinguisher fails. Well, what's the likelihood of the fire extinguisher failing? Oh, it's about 1 in a million. Right, so I have to have a 1 in a million stamp every year to deal with a fire. How often is there a fire in a bus? Oh, there's hundreds of those every year. Okay, so what, 1% of buses? So for 1 in 100 million risk, you need it stamped every year. And yet they sold it, and the industry has it down in a standard, and the standard makes it happen. If we had a standard that said you needed to inspect trees in every tree in every school every 6 months, that's what would happen. Okay, so what did the fire protection industry do? They said you've got to do it every 6 months. You've got to do it every 6 months in every strata and every unit in New South Wales. And so it goes on. Why do they do it? It's a great way to make money.
Yeah.
Truly is an awesome way. And I'm not against tree industry making money at all. But if we're going to do a risk assessment, let's do a risk assessment. We're going to do an inventory. Let's do an inventory. If we want to combine the two, let's keep them separate. Because if I want to communicate risk, I've got 2 to 3 pages to do it in. By the time you get to page 4, I've lost the reader's attention.